Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cusson, and here on this episode, we are going to be doing something very special. We are going to be returning to list making because this is what Ben Phillips and I do. We don't talk about individual movies, we talk about movies in packs. Last year's pack was Disney. We talked about all 63 animated Disney movies. This year, we are going to be doing two parts on Pixar, which was a little bit more chaotic to put together, admittedly. But it feels like our viewpoint is a little bit more consistent. So I don't know if it's going to make for more interesting podcasting, but the list is certainly diverse. And wait until you see what happened with number one. I'm not going to spoil it, but we'll get into that. And of course, Ben Phillips is here. I'm going to introduce him momentarily. Make sure you leave a 4 or 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Click the bell icon for notifications. Brian and I are coming off a month where we discussed 4 Eddie Murphy movies. We are going to be getting into some baseball a little bit in the month of April. And of course, tonight is all about ranking the first 18 Pixar movies of the 28. We're going to give the top 10 its own episode, a lot of time to breathe, a lot of time to talk about 10 pretty amazing movies, but we're going to get through the first half of the list, including one of the more inexplicable trilogies in the history of movie making. We'll get to that shortly. Ben Phillips is of course in the UK, so of course navigating an episode like this when there is such a time difference with me being in the Midwest and Ben being in the UK, it's always a challenge, but always a pleasure to talk to one Ben Phillips. Ben, how's it going?
It's going okay. I mean, I'm not oppressively late. I feel like we've done these records far later in the day. This one is a positively relaxing 4 p.m. my time. And at least the UK's only got one time zone. We're not any of that weird American we've got 3, 4.
We have 4 time zones, but we are also a much bigger country. Which I'm not gonna lie, Ben, it's definitely something I've been thinking a lot about lately. The fact that America's so big.
Maybe it was too big.
I mean, too big to fail, maybe. I don't know. We're gonna see how this all works out. You know, a lot of stuff going on.
It's fine. It's only logical to make it bigger by adding up an entire new country onto the landmass of the United States of America.
One country. We want to add 3 or 4 countries.
I mean, Greenland barely counts as a country.
We certainly do. All right, we are off the rails. Let's get back on the rails. So Pixar, basically, it's good that we're recording it this year because it's 30 years old, and we have 28 movies to talk about. We have quite a lot of history to get into. This studio has definitely had an up and down journey. It feels like the first decade or so, some unimpeachably either great movies or very innovative movies, and just really forwarding animation. They got kind of stuck in a rut. It feels like they were starting to find some creativity again, but COVID happened, and now we're kind of stuck in sequel land. Just before this podcast was recorded, Coco 2 was announced for 2029, so just another sequel to add to the slate. But regardless of how many sequels they've had, and regardless of the territory that they've covered, Ben, it feels like we still have a lot of classic movies. We still have a lot of really great movies, even though the studio has had its struggles.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one because I feel like my entire piece on Pixar tends to come around to the fact that it really was in the beginning kind of these 5 great voices of animation, and I think I'm counting it right with 5 of them because you've got it's obviously Lasseter
with an asterisk.
I'm saying in terms of the quality of the movies, not the quality of the people.
I was going to put the asterisk on it because, of course, we know what John Lasseter has done in his personal life. But yes, you're right. He is undoubtedly a huge creative voice for Pixar. And honestly, ever since he left Disney, I don't think that the studio has been able to recover his creative voice for whatever you think. And again, he deserved to be fired, but it feels like his creative voice was really helping Disney.
No, absolutely, and that's the thing is the early days of Pixar with Lasseter and Doctor and Stanton and Brad Bird, and you can include Unkrich in that as well, who's kind of around in the early days but obviously not a director until you get to Toy Story 3. But it's kind of like those guys leading the way are a powerhouse of American animation, kind of like pushing American animation in a very particular way. Kind of like it over usurps Disney as kind of like the king of American animation. And then ever since then they've kind of run into succession problems, and every single time they've tried to bring in new voices or cultivate new voices, it keeps on reverting back to the fact that they never found the replacements for those kind of like 5 original guys who were producing these movies. And that's not to say there haven't been great people involved in Pixar in later days, and I think in recent years they've actually gotten better at kind of like finding those new voices. Like I think Enrico Casarosa and Domi Shi are like fantastic new talent voices from Pixar, and the fact that those two are the people who made not only the most like 2 of the best Pixar movies of the last kind of like decade, but also 2 of the most visually interesting, I think speaks volumes about kind of actually finding those future people. And it's all the stuff they've got in the go forward, which is so thoroughly not only Disney pilled in terms of it's forcing them to go back to sequels and to go back to like recognizable IP, but it's still like, I mean, Unkrich is directing Coco 2, isn't he? Like that was part of the announcement as well, is like not only has, even though he left the company, he's back to do the sequel to Coco.
I mean, it's toughened them their streets, I'm sure. I mean, I think that's got to be a part of it, just in terms of animation and a lot of cuts that have happened recently. So I'm sure that may have been an inspiration for their return. But I also think that Disney Plus and the idea of these Disney Plus TV shows or what have you, I think it's really done a lot of damage to these studios, because I feel like some of the focus is being taken away from just doing movies and having to focus on doing TV shows. I think it's hurt Marvel. I think it's hurt Star Wars. I think it's hurt Disney animation, and I think it's hurt Pixar as well. And I think with Pixar particularly, like they've had to focus on like doing a Monsters University prequel. They did the Forky stuff, which the Forky stuff probably isn't a big deal in terms of like creative focus, but like having to do Win or Lose and then not being able to do the show their way with taking away a trans character's backstory. And just like it feels like that Disney Plus took has really hurt Pixar in particular, because it felt like the default, especially with Luca, Turning Red, and Soul all ending up on the service straight away instead of getting a proper theatrical release.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is like the diversification of this stuff is so depressing, because Pixar used to be, you would get a Pixar short basically every single year that would supposed to be a showcase for the new talent, and it would be attached to a movie. And we haven't had one of those theatrically since Bao, which obviously was Dong Shi's kind of like mainstream introduction. Obviously Bao's fantastic as a short. I believe it won the Academy Award for Best Short that year. But since then it's kind of they transitioned to doing those YouTube bits that felt more like they were experimenting with different animation styles, and then they've done so many more theatrical related shorts, kind of like, and I don't know, there's like, again, they're a company that always used to be able to have that diversity of voices and diversity of kind of like the kind of things they were telling, and with the Pixar kind of crackdown, or even like the departure of Lasseter, they've kind of lost the ability to make original content at the same pace that they were beforehand. That's good, and kind of like fallen back onto IP and fallen back onto kind of just more stale ideas. Like the amount of Pixar movies at this point, and obviously this is more a case of like one creative voice being so involved, that are basically just, what if we took this kind of like metaphysical concept and made it a bureaucracy? Is like that is 5, 6, 7 Pixar movies at this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the movies on this list that we're going to be talking about pretty shortly is absolutely, it's like it's borderline parody at this point, and I completely agree with you. I don't, and again, I don't have the solution to these problems, because it feels like Wall-E was kind of like the last like movie that really like crossed the threshold in terms of like both being in new territory, also just being incredible animation. And it just feels like in recent years, you've gotten a lot of great animation, but it just feels like a lot of these concepts are not nearly as strong. And I say that with all due respect to something like Coco, which I think is a really good movie in its own right. But it feels like that movie. It feels like some of the I don't know. It feels like some of the essence has been lost a little bit, and maybe they're going to try to regain some of that with Coco too. But I mean, the thing that I remember about Coco, besides the incredible ending, is the fact that we also had that 21-minute Olaf special that aired before it, and it feels like what has happened to Pixar, kind of in a nutshell, just Disney kind of insinuating itself on this company.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what you say with Wally being like the last time that they did this, is that is basically the timeline of they had this initial deal of like 5 movies with Disney, and then that deal ended with Cars. They go independent and they start making like 3 movies, which are Ratatouille, Wall-E, and Up. And in the middle of all of that, it's when oh god, who's the president of Disney at the moment?
Bob Iger.
Bob Iger. That's when Bob Iger comes to power and basically says what, like, he goes to Disneyland and sees all the excitement over the Pixar characters and not over the Disney characters, and goes, why don't we own Pixar? And that's when he goes to Pixar and buys them in this kind of window. And so those 3 movies were made without Disney oversight, but become Disney movies retroactively. And then the first movie they greenlight, or the first 2 movies they greenlight in this post Disney acquisition, are Toy Story 3 and Cars 2. And obviously one of those is on the better side, and the other one is the first movie that we need to discuss right now, which is number 28 with Cars 2.
Great transition, Ben. That was
and I think that becomes so emblematic of kind of like the latter years of Pixar, which is like you basically get these one for us, one for them, one for us, one for them kind of like thing, and you end up in this situation where it's like Coco comes out and it's like it's a year after Finding Dory, and like again it's this kind of thing where it's like, I hate that we've got this alternate alternation between the two of them, but yeah, it's sad.
I mean, look at DreamWorks. DreamWorks, you had in the same year you had Despicable Me 4 and The Wild Robot. So that's the trade-off that we're making in animation right now. In order to get The Wild Robot, you have to get the Minions. You just have to. That is so unfortunate. But Cars 2 is a good place to start off because it's really bad. It is undoubtedly, I think it's easily the worst Pixar movie. I think there's a huge distance between the number 28 movie and the number 27 movie.
Yeah, I mean, we both had. I mean, the first 2 movies we've got an identical place on our list. Cars 2 is my least favorite Pixar movie. It doesn't help that Cars, to me, the original, feels emblematic of like them breaking the model that they had, which was this kind of like each movie they made was, let's tell a story about the human world, but we're going to do it from a weird perspective, be it the monsters that live in your closet or the bugs on the ground or the toys in your bedroom. And then Cars is like, what if we tell a story from the perspective of cars, except there are no humans in this world, but all of the infrastructure that humans need but cars don't is going to exist in this world. And then they try to make a sequel to that movie and make it a spy movie, but have Larry the Cable Guy as the lead actor, and it's not funny, and it's not a good parody of like spy movies, and it's also trying to talk about renewable energy, but like making the villain the character that wants renewable energy, but also it's not really about renewable energy. Like it's tonally confusing, completely unfunny. It's built on like this teetering block of a world that makes no sense, and kind of like you have to really buy into this whole world to do it. And then on top of that, it's the funny supporting character, funny in quotation marks, supporting character from the first movie, which lends it an air of like we don't give a fuck about this one.
I walked into this trilogy in rewatching it, and this is the kind of movie, the original is the kind of movie that absolutely gets greenlit in the George Bush administration. And it comes out in 2006, presumably 03, 04 is when it starts being put into production. But like it just feels like the kind of movie that you're making in George Bush's America. And this is kind of like the dribbles and drabbles of that, because Cars 2 comes out in 2011, and obviously George Bush is not the president, but they're still trying to linger in that world. And the fact that you have Larry the Cable Guy as the lead character, the quote unquote funny guy, I mean, it just feels like, okay, we don't have Paul Newman, we don't have George Carlin, so we're going to kind of change things up and we're going to give the lead role to somebody else. And it just fails miserably. I mean, this is, I mean, it's so bad. And it's not playing in the same space as the first one. It is a profoundly bizarre choice to do a spy thriller in this universe when there is nothing in the first movie to even suggest this as a possibility. And then when you get to Cars 3, they really don't even acknowledge the existence of the second movie. So this is just a complete outlier, not only for the Cars franchise, but for Pixar as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the only reason this movie gets a sequel is, I assume, the fact that the Cars merchandise sales were so big, and in 2006 it was like Disney are trying desperately to find their boy franchise. They thought they had it with Pirates, then Cars comes along and they kind of like really want Cars, and the Cars merchandise is so big. But again, it's that same, like, this is still the era of Disney where they buy Marvel and they buy Star Wars. They've solved their boy franchise. Not by this point, obviously. We're about a year away from the buying Disney. This is the same year as the buying Disney deal, actually, I think. So we're buying Marvel, and then Star Wars is 2012.
I love that Bob Iger gets cited as this genius when he's like, "Why? Well, there's all this popularity over X. Let's just buy it." That's a real genius move on his part. Just buying things.
Just buying things, but obviously it works out for Disney for kind of 10 years, and now we're kind of reaching the point where, like, let's suck the creativity out of this and lose.
Look at the state of look at the state of Star Wars and Marvel, and it's pretty dicey out there. And again, I say this knowing that like a lot of their movies still made $1 billion, but it feels like we're on fumes.
Oh, all three of these, Pixar, Star Wars, and Disney, and Marvel, are all on fumes at this point, as you say, and that's ironic because we're talking about Cars 2. But I don't want to spend any more time on Cars 2, so let's move on to number 27, which I think it is a better movie than Cars 2, but I do think has to take the award for the most boring movie that Pixar has ever made. Like, it's The Good Dinosaur. This thing looks incredible. It's like one of those things where, like, this is a real Pixar flex in terms of like water animation and all of this stuff, and the movie on the other side of it is just punishingly dull. Like, there is nothing interesting about this movie. I think
how has Disney made two of the most boring dinosaur movies of all time?
Well, exactly, and it's like I don't know how you fix this. It's weird that this movie is like a different version of Ice Age in the relationship between like animals and humans in this period. And I'm
not gonna lie, I watched this after watching Lion King 2, and it's like, why did Lion King 2 borrow a lot of elements from this movie?
Yeah, it's truly like, I mean, and that's things like, there's no bad words to say about the animation, but I do think it's kind of becoming one of those, like, we've had a couple of bites from the Peter Sohn like apple at this point in terms of like what his style is, and I think he to me feels like safe Pixar, like the kind of person who grew up on kind of like building these Pixar movies, but doesn't know what the juice is in behind some of the ideas that made early Pixar so good, because his two are The Good Dinosaur and Elemental, and one of them is boring and one of them is much like Cars, a movie where I sit there and kind of like question the world building and the rules behind this all. And the fact that I'm trying to talk about another movie apart from The Good Dinosaur, I think should speak volumes. It's kind of a Western, but like,
it's a nothing burger of a movie. I mean, that's the thing, is that ultimately there's no there, and I think that is the fundamental problem, and I think it's an issue that this director Peter Stone has had with Elemental as well, which we're going to get to shortly. I think at least that movie is trying to do some different things, but this movie is just it feels like the type of movie that you make because it's like, oh, kids love dinosaurs, let's do our version of a dinosaur movie.
Exactly.
And maybe you should just not do it. Like, you can just not do your version of a dinosaur movie.
It's just the fact that like they have no, like, I don't understand how you get from let's do dinosaurs to let's do dinosaur western, but the western elements aren't really going to come in until Sam Elliott's going to show up as a cattle herding Tyrannosaurus Rex. Like, what?
That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of idea that you have when you have no other ideas. You're just like, let's bring Sam Elliott. Let's get his voice in this movie. Like, look at the voice acting, and it's like they're using that to compensate for the lack of script. I mean, you have Jeffrey Wright, who is known for his voice work. You have Sam Elliott. Like, those are two of the quintessential voices that you hear in just about everything.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's like the movie is almost all right in the early going when it's like Arlo and his family, and Arlo like trying to like overcome his fear, but then it does the whole like, well, we need to separate him from his family and meet this weird, wacky bunch of characters, but then none of the characters are memorable. You've mostly sat him with a human who can't speak full sentences. Like, it's
this is the most that anybody has ever talked about The Good Dinosaur.
No, it is absolutely the most that anyone's ever talked about The Good Dinosaur. So let's move to safer territory and rattle through 26 and 25, which like I think we just need to pair these two together and kind of say why they're interesting flips on the coin and why you and I are actually disagreeing on which one is better than the other. So 26 is Cars and 25 is Cars 3, which you think is the best of the Cars trilogy, whereas I think it's the second best, and I prefer Cars 1. So okay, I'll let you do your piece on Cars 3.
To be fair, I have Cars 3 at 3 stars and Cars at 2.5 stars. So I don't want to pretend like that there's some huge disparity. Like, I think that Cars 3 is a slightly more interesting and competently made movie than Cars 1. But I don't think that either movie is very good. I think that ultimately I did not need to see a Cars 3. Let's be clear about that. I think that there's some journey stuff in Cars 3 that I think works a little bit better. I think Cruz Ramirez is an interesting character in a better movie, if that makes sense. Like, I think there is some potential there. I just don't think that this is the movie that could really kind of get the best out of that character. I just think Cars 1 is pretty much like a paint by numbers, like, animated movie. Again, paint by numbers Cars. I mean, we're really delivering on the metaphors in this episode. I think Cars 1 has some interesting elements in terms of the animation, but it's just nostalgic again for a time that doesn't exist. Like, it's amazing to me that this movie has become so popular, because I get it's because cars go vroom vroom. That's why. But it's funny to me that kids enjoy a movie that is nostalgic for the 1950s and the time before highways. I just think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's truly bizarre. I do think a big part of it is the cars go vroom vroom. I think it's truly one of the things where, like, I think it's weird that Cars 3 is probably what, like, it can't have been the first movie, but it's also the only movie in the entire franchise that's actually about the racing. Like right. Cars 1 is as you say, it's this nostalgic plea that mostly spends its time in this like small town and kind of like being nostalgic for a time that's gone by, for Route 66 and how we've ignored Route 66 and decided to build Route 66 is what replaces the little country roads.
And you'll love this, Ben. I don't know how adept you are in American history, but one of the reasons that highways got built is to separate black neighborhoods too. Let's not forget that.
Which
Cars will not be interesting in this movie.
Cars is not equipped to talk about that, obviously, and instead we spend our time in this like little town that used to have all these people, and it's where like the Doc Hudson has like settled down, and he's like the greatest Piston Cup racer ever. And I think, I mean, I do think Paul Newman is good in this movie, and I think all the stuff with Doc Hudson is like the stuff that kind of like keeps it above. And I think there's some like the bits that work, like the stuff where it's like where Sally and Lightning go on a date and drive through the desert is like it's really nicely animated, but the movie is just this bizarre, as you say, like nostalgic boomer trip for a time that didn't really exist, or if it did exist, it's for reasons like you say, where we were segregating people from other people, and yeah, just completely not equipped. And then Cars 3 is just this 10 years too late sequel, which again they can't keep Lightning as the main character of these movies. They keep on positioning someone else to be the person to take over. Yeah, and like I just think it's another one of those.
I would argue it's slightly more successful in Cars 3.
Yeah, like that's the thing is, like, I think all of the, I will fully hear an argument that Cars 3 is better. I just think there's at least a cohesive vision behind Cars 1, whereas Cars 3 feels like it's like we need to make an ending to this trilogy, but by this point the trilogy's kind of like completely lost all sight of kind of like what it's about, and instead it's about, again, the future technology and the future of racing, and again, like the main villain of the movie is
the first 20 minutes of Cars 3 is what Cars 2 probably should have been in some way. Like they should have gotten some sort of journey going with Cars 2 that felt similar to the first 20 minutes of this, and I think that's why you're getting that feeling, because Cars 2 doesn't really address any of this, because all the attention is on Larry the fucking Cable Guy.
And yeah, I mean, Cars 3 is just one of one of the things I always think about when I hear Cars is the overwhelming thing is Griffin Newman from Blank Check has a saying, which is Cars 2 makes Cars 3 look like Cars 1, which is obviously his way of kind of ragging on Cars 2, but saying that Cars 3 is almost like Cars 1. But yeah, it's all these movies are so interchangeable, in all honesty. But the only thing that we are fully agreed on is Cars 2 is worst.
I really want to get somebody like, and we have to be approaching the age when, the kids who really liked Cars 1 in 2006 were 5, 6 years old. Like, I really want to know the people that are nostalgic for Cars 1. I just want to, and I'm not even saying this to be mean. I genuinely want to meet the kids who really loved Cars 1 and who were age appropriate. Like when we're seeing this, we're in our 20s, or at least I'm in my 20s. I really want to meet the people that are nostalgic for Cars 1 and maybe have fonder feelings of this franchise, because I want to know why. I'm
looking at my letterboxd. I've got 5 people who've given it 4 stars. Almost all of them are younger than myself, and I'm 14 when this movie comes out. So I'm also this to me is my window of kind of like, I'm a teenager. I don't give a shit about Pixar, which is why I then skip seeing like Ratatouille in the cinema. So I don't come to Ratatouille until like a couple of years later, and all the rest of it, and kind of obviously realize like, I'm an idiot. These movies are still good, even if I'm a too cool teenager at that point. But
it's weird. Like there's definitely Disney movies that I should have seen in theaters, but just didn't. And now it's like, now I'm punishing myself because I'll go see the Disney movie over Thanksgiving, whether it's good or not.
Yeah. I'm less discerning as an adult than I was as a teenager.
It's pretty funny. So speaking of, I don't have a good fire. I mean,
like, we're just moving from, again, like my bugbears with a lot of these bottom ones are the worlds make no sense. Like the Cars world not having humans is really annoying. Elemental, our number 24 pick, makes no, like, it's trying to be a racial metaphor, but like it completely fails, because it's just got these, like, there are just so many questions that you have to ask about this movie that like there's.
So I think we've agreed that Disney's biggest problem is the lack of villains. If Elemental picks either the immigrant storyline or the romantic storyline and gives us a villain, how much better is this movie?
Probably quite a bit, and I don't want I don't want that. I mean, but then if you say we need a villain in our immigrant storyline, then you end up probably with something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, where you can't truly villainize the immigrant parent because it's just a world of like miscommunication or not understanding and whatnot. Where obviously, like in that movie, it like she is villainous, but not in a way which
You could turn the bureaucracy into the villain now.
yeah, no, absolutely. That's the thing. I think the romance side of this is the far stronger. The fire and water meeting together, and how do you deal with a world where like these elements weren't mixing together and all the rest of it. But then you're just ending up in a world of, oh, are we just doing Avatar or are we just doing Raya and the Last Dragon? Like you end up in that kind of like weird anime mysticism kind of thing. But so yeah, so Elemental, it just this nothing of a movie which I feel like there's a strong enough idea in the background of Elemental to maybe do something, but it's just so half baked where it's like it's the first pitch that someone threw out that, oh, what if there's a world where fire and water meet, and then they kind of like didn't get much further on from that. And again, it's not like any of the other ideas of this literalizing concepts and creating a society around them, because it's like Inside Out is not a world in like that's recognizable to human society. They do a job, and it's all to build or like do emotional stuff to build things, whereas Elemental is taking the human world and latching onto something that shouldn't have human elements per se because they're inanimate objects. Like the Toy Story toys live in the human world but aren't living as a human society. Same with Bug's Life. Monsters Inc. is the closest we get to it, but even then it's just this idea of like that we're two sides of the same coin. And so Elemental and Cars are the two that kind of break this thing where there's no thought put into what would this society actually look like if elements were sentient, etc., etc. Like, and to me, that it's the first fundamental failing, and then you get on to obviously, as you say, like the lack of villains, the half-assed attempt to do stories about immigrant culture and the ways in which people are different, and it's trying to be progressive, but in the most milquetoast, non-committal way that you could possibly be.
So what you're saying is very much the liberal or labor way of doing things.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. The Wade character annoys the shit out of me, and I can't tell you if it's the voice acting or if it's the writing, but I think Wade, and I know that you are a fan of the romantic element, and in a way, Pixar really has strayed away from it in a lot of movies. So I like the fact that they're doing it, and I think the idea of fire and water meeting and creating something beautiful is something that could work. But the Wade character, just to me, is kind of a dud. I think Leia Lewis's character, I think Ember is slightly more interesting, but again, it just feels like, oh, it's just fail. The fail daughter trope is something that something that really bothers me in movies and shows, and it feels like we're doing that again in this movie. It just feels like a lot of ideas that, again, like you said, first draft only. It feels like when we get to the end of this movie, like this is actually where the movie should have started, is the ending of this movie.
Yeah, like a couple together. But again, it's like, how do you avoid, if you pitch that movie as there are already a couple at the end of this movie, then you're like, okay, so we're making Passing? Like, what are we doing here? We're doing a Pixar movie about an interracial relationship, or?
I mean, I would argue that is far more interesting. I mean, Pixar is probably going to argue that, oh, we have to explore the origin story. Stop with the goddamn origin stories. Like, there's so many movies and shows right now that it's like the end of the first season really should have just been the pilot, or the first movie really is just like a throat clearing session. Like, again, to me, I think there are some interesting elements, pun intended, but it just feels like a movie that ultimately doesn't work. And we didn't need it. Speaking of movies that don't need to exist, Ben.
Yeah, we're talking about Lightyear, which is a movie about How was it? How was it that Chris Evans introduced this movie when it was introduced? This is a movie about the real guy that inspired the Buzz Lightyear from the Toy Story movies.
I do have to say, I want to rant and rave about this movie, but I will say the opening sentence of this movie actually gets the idea across pretty clearly. The problem that I have with this movie is that the way that this movie is being framed is, and I think this is a huge problem. We are framing this movie in terms of an 8-year-old boy is going to watch this movie, love it so much that they want a toy, and this toy is basically going to be something that they enjoy for their entire kid life, right? That's the conceit of this movie, is that we are supposed to watch this through Andy's eyes and love it for that reason. The problem with this movie is it is not something that I could see an 8-year-old boy really liking. And again, I'm not an 8-year-old boy. I can't say that definitively. There are 8-year-old boys that probably do really love this movie, but I just don't buy if I've always seen Andy as like, okay, he's like a straight down the middle, just like a typical white American boy, right? I just don't buy that he would see this movie and be like, I really want Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear is kind of a drip in this movie. Like, not only is he an asshole, he's just not that interesting.
Okay, I'm just gonna do a thought experiment right now. So I think we have a very similar complaint. I'm just gonna list off now a bunch of 90s science fiction films that I could 100% see a young boy watching that movie and then latching onto it very, very well. And we're gonna very quickly figure out why Pixar possibly could not have made a Lightyear movie that actually felt indebted to that. So, 90 sci-fi movies: The Fifth Element, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, Event Horizon, Independence Day, 12 Monkeys.
Right. I don't disagree that those are all R-rated movies, of course.
They are, but like that's the thing is, Andy is at that age where the only way he is going to latch onto a movie and make it part of his personality is if he's sneaking into an R-rated movie. In the same way that you get RoboCop and you get like these things that are made for adults and then converted into children's toys later down the line.
I could see that, but but the other thing is that these are toys too, right? That's the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what's so weird about it. It's like I would almost rather Pixar have made like a like just something a little bit riskier with this, and instead it is the like I can't even think of like what 90s science fiction movies were made for children, really.
Okay, so Ben, I'm gonna say the same thing about Elemental that I said about this movie. To me, the ending of Lightyear is actually what the first Lightyear should have been. If they were just exploring space, and if they were doing something akin to like sort of a cross between Star Trek and Star Wars, where they are both exploring space, but there's also kind of a swashbuckling action element to it. That is the kind of movie that I could see Andy liking more.
Yeah,
this
but then
this is a poor remake of Interstellar.
Do you know what you've just asked for is?
What?
The TV show they made based on Buzz Lightyear in the 90s and the 2000s is what you've asked for.
I mean, I can almost see if that was who the action figure was supposed to be based on, that would make a lot more sense than this movie.
No,
because I don't know how anybody goes away from this movie thinking that Andy would want a Buzz Lightyear over the cat.
That's the thing is like you think about like the Buzz Lightyear TV show that exists has got like an alien princess who can like turn intangible, and like a giant like frog dinosaur that like is like got a heart of gold, and then like a tiny robot that kind of like travels around with them. And this movie's got time travel, and as you say, like it's an Interstellar remake of kind of like losing touch with the people from your time, and a robotic cat.
So depressed. Like the first half hour of this movie is mind-bogglingly depressing.
I mean, I will say this is Peterson's best work. Socks is like all-time, like incredible, like love Socks, yes. Socks Innocent. But this is also like possibly the nadir of like Taika Waititi showing up in movies and doing.
Oh yes! Oh my god! It's so bad.
It sucks, and it's like, and the contortions they get themselves into to like pay off the Buzz Lightyear, I am your father line from Zurg in Toy Story 2 are like insane, and there's nothing in it that is like even referencing like the game that they play in Toy Story 2, and they just make it into this boring idea of what modern sci-fi is instead of a riff on like 80s and 90s sci-fi, which this movie should have been.
Right. You almost need to just make it an 80s sci-fi movie instead of like something like Fifth Element. You almost have to go into something where you're doing like Indiana Jones in space almost. Like you almost have to do a Spielberg or Lucas instead.
Yeah. Those ideas work better. Like if you're going 80s, either you should be paying homage to like John Carpenter, or you should be paying homage to Spielberg, as you say, like these two guys who are, again, filmmakers that would, either you are like the best kids movie that ever existed, or you're a kid finally feeling like an adult watching this thing. Like those are the only ways that you imprint on this, and this is the equivalent of like 90s direct to DVD animated schlock. It's like Fern Gully, or like just something so immemorable.
Well, Ben, Disney already owns the franchise that is paying homage to Fern Gully. It's called Avatar.
Yeah, but Avatar movies are good, and at least like a real director is behind those.
We're not going to get into this, but
Avatar 3 coming out this year. Expect the Avatar ranking podcast to come 2026.
It won't. I have not seen Avatar 2, and I never will.
Oh, you should. It rules. I've seen it twice in the cinema in IMAX.
Let's speaking of, I don't have a good transition. Can we just talk about Brave, Sarah? Because
yeah, my wife's favorite Pixar movie.
It's 15 years later. Her hair still looks pretty awesome, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Brave is, Brave again, like when you line them up and you realize Brave is so seemingly a realm of Disney having bought Pixar and kind of saying, right, we want you to make a princess movie. And Brave feels like the least Pixar of all the Pixar movies in some ways. Like,
it really does. I mean, it feels like Disney saw this and we're like, okay, Frozen, do this better, and they did.
Yeah, and again, there's a reason why Merida Wreck-It Ralph 2, like that it's paying a tradition to the Disney princesses, but like they don't really need to say like the Disney Pixar princesses or whatever. And I like Brave. I think the transition to like this is the first movie that we're talking about where I've given it higher than like a 2.5 stars. I have to say, like everything else on this list is 2.5 stars or lower. This is the first movie on this where I'm like,
a 3-star movie for me. I like Brave. This and our next movie feel incredibly compromised, and I feel like there is a better version of this movie out there that just either didn't get made or is on the cutting room floor. It just feels like this movie had a lot of potential, and it sucks that the movie that had the first female director, she ends up getting fired. It looks bad all around, especially with what we know about Pixar culture and John Lasseter. It reflects very poorly on them.
It does absolutely. And like there's good elements. I like the voice cast. I think Helen McDonald's really good. I think Emma Thompson's good. I think Billy Connolly's good. But then you have the fact that Emma Thompson becomes a bear that doesn't have any dialogue for like 2/3 of this movie. And yeah, I don't know. It feels more Disney animation than Pixar animation, and I think that level of compromise really does show through, and you expect it to be something that's going to have that like additional oomph that Pixar has, and instead it kind of is this soft, not nothing. I think the bits in it that are effective are very effective. I just think it doesn't coalesce, come together to punch you in the gut in a way that feels satisfying.
Yeah, man, it feels really it's hard to talk about Brave because it just feels like a movie that this is the kind of movie I feel like that we should almost be talking about the way we talk about Frozen, and it feels like we lost something when we lost this director, and it's just really hard to really get into with any depth. And Speaking of compromised movies, Inside Out 2.
Well, I mean, I kind of want to do the next three all as a run because I think they are, again, so emblematic of like this latter day Pixar stuff.
I would not disagree with you.
In 21st is Inside Out, in 20th is Finding Dory, and in 19th is Monster University. All three of them are like movies that probably did not need sequels or prequels. That like two of them are basically the same movie again, but kind of like flipping one or two elements on its head, and then the last one is an origin story, which is it's a little bit different, but like yeah, Inside Out 2
somebody at Pixar watched Animal House, and they're like, I really want to do Animal House, and that's what they did.
Yeah, exactly. But Inside Out 2 and Finding Dory 2, or Finding Dory, are two very much like the formula is basically the same. Like, remove one character, put them with a cast of like someone else, and then we'll have an adventure which kind of is like the first adventure, but like a little bit different because we've kind of shaken the cup around and people are paired with different stuff. And yeah, I mean, I don't think either of them are bad. I just think none of them needed to exist, which is possibly more damning.
Here's the thing. I think here's my issue, and I am not as high on Finding Nemo as you are, which we'll get into in the next episode. I think you think Finding Nemo is an all-time classic. Would you say that that's true?
Yes, absolutely. I adore Finding Nemo.
I definitely liked it the most on this. I did a recent rewatch, and I actually upped my rating. I definitely like Finding Nemo now more than I used to, but I think Finding Dory, I don't find it in terms of like the sacred nature of a movie like this. I don't think that it's sacred territory. So Finding Dory, I think is good. I like the ending. I think it does pay off the character nicely. Could they have done it in a better way? Yes, but I think it's fine. Monsters University, I really like Monsters Inc. I think it's a very, again, just kind of what Pixar does in terms of those early days. Monsters University is just kind of a paint by numbers, like we're going to do a movie in college, and it just feels like we're going to explore the genre, and that's all they do, and it's fine. Inside Out 2 is probably the sequel that makes me the angriest, just because Inside Out 1 left so much room on the table for doing a true exploration of emotions and really getting into things. And I think Inside Out 2, the premise of Inside Out 2 is phenomenal, and it's just explored in the dumbest way possible. They limit themselves by having the story take place over one weekend, which is a huge mistake. The fact that they refuse to let the character be gay is really stupid because it's so obvious that that's where they want to go. And I just think that the movie just feels like a child's version of the first movie. So of all the movies on this list, in some ways, Inside Out 2 makes me the angriest. What are your thoughts on Inside Out 2?
I mean, again, I agree with everything that you've said about Inside Out 2. I think all of the missteps they make, I just think the core of those Inside Out movies is strong enough to kind of overcome that, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think there's still some things about it that work. I don't think that it's not a complete failure, but it's enough of a failure to where I just ended up being really disappointed by it. This movie is number 24 on my list, so that should tell you kind of about where I'm at on it. I am not as high on it as Ben is, so there's definitely a little bit of disagreement. It feels like resolving the anxiety thing in one weekend is just an enormous mistake that they can never recover from.
I guess that is the case. But I feel like I'm higher on it than a lot of people when it came out last year, where I was kind of like, everyone was kind of saying, "Oh, it's a disaster" and everything. I'm like, I don't think it's a disaster. I think it's.
I don't think it's a disaster. I wouldn't go that far. I just think it's a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I just think I came out of it and I was just kind of, oh, it's interesting that people are so vehemently against this movie, and I think it's mostly good, and I think you can headcanon stuff like Riley being gay, and yeah, it's
if Disney did a better job of having queer characters, I don't think this would be like for example, if the relationship in, I don't know, Lightyear had been more explicit, or if there had been an explicitly lead character that did have a same-sex partner. I don't know that people would be as mad, but given everything that's going on and given the reputation and even given some of the postscript with what happened with Win or Lose, I think this movie loses it loses its credibility in terms of being able to not have the character be gay. And again, part of it is the storyline itself lends itself to it as well.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of just good enough for what it needs to be, which again, possibly more damning than anything else. But and again, it's the exact same thing with Finding Dory, where I think it's good enough like to overcome this. And I do think those are two of the biggest kind of like expectations on a sequel that they had, that not but neither of them need to exist. I don't think either of them shit the bed in a way where like they will never be overtaken by the original. Fundamentally, like there's nothing about them that feels like the original is worse because of it, which you get in cases like I think Cars is worse because Cars 2 exists. But then
I can see that.
There's nothing about them that sticks in the mind, but like when you're watching them, they're perfectly pleasant. I may be talking myself into like lowering the scores on them, but I think it's this. I do think there's a weird energy where on my list there's this weird dearth of kind of like 3 to 3.5 star Pixar movies, because most of them are so good, and yeah,
right.
like
So something has to go to the bottom. I mean,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's the thing. It's like with Disney, there's almost like tiers. There were definitely movies that were bottom level Disney, and it just feels like there is a bottom, but it's so short that we're immediately getting into movies that I've given 3 and 3.5 stars, and that is true for the number 18 movie as well.
Yes, number 18. We're just gonna brush over Monster University again. The most. Yeah, I don't know why it exists. It's Animal House.
It's kind of fitting.
No, absolutely. I don't think anyone remembers Monster University. It's weird that was like the third sequel that they ever, or third franchise movie they ever did. But yeah, 18 onwards. The movie that
the most
COVID killed.
Pixar movie of all time.
Yes, comes out. Is it a week before COVID hits?
In the United States, I don't know about the UK, but definitely like this is the last movie that I saw in theaters for a year.
Yeah, I think it could have been the last movie I saw in cinemas, but we skipped it. And then I think when we came out the other side of COVID, it was one of the first movies I saw because they were like, well, no one actually got to see this during COVID, so let's just put it back on again.
Yeah, if this did not get a re-release in the States, at least it did get a big re-release. I mean, I like this movie. I don't think it's great. I think Chris Pratt, and plus I'm much more anti Chris Pratt now. Chris Pratt's character really annoys the piss out of me, and I think that's one of the parts of the movie that angers me the most. But Tom Holland is really good. Like Tom Holland, like he is not a traditional voice actor, but I mean he's really good in this, and I think it is a shame that Tom Holland has really not been able to escape the Disney or Spider-Man mold because I think he's really good in a lot of things, and I think he shines in this movie. In terms of voiceover work, this is one of the stronger performances in this side of the on this side of the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I do think that the reason why this movie doesn't work for me is just this total miscalibration of kind of like what we need to see happen essentially, where like they think because they've cast two charming enough actors in the roles that like we will kind of like come around to what's happening, but it's that situation where, as you say, it's the Chris Pratt character isn't charming enough to overcome the fact that you do think he's a dick, and so like the kind of
He's
turn.
Just, I mean, this is the thing is that they don't turn the switch until the very last minute. He's just a dick the whole time.
Yeah, which like that. Yeah, it's. And I get it where it's like, oh, we're kind of doing our onward, it's our D&D reference. And I know people who get really like hung up on like the brotherly and like the dead dad of it all. And I have seen people kind of say like, this is the kind of underrated Pixar movie from the last 10 years. Like Soul is exactly what Pixar have been doing for years and years and years. But Onwards is like this kind of like sneaky movie. And I just think there's nothing there outside of like, the things that you might enjoy about it are, again, we're in this run of
I definitely like this movie more than you. This was number 17 on my list, whereas I don't know where it was on yours, but I definitely am higher on this movie than you are. And I think I think the movie is just charming enough to win me over. I like the animation in this movie, just in terms of the world building. I think there's some funny moments. It is definitely not top tier Pixar, and I don't know that it was trying to be, but I think this is Pixar doing. Pixar's like, we want to do a road movie. This is their version of that, and I think they're successful at it. I think it's the baseball equivalent of like a ground rule double.
I think the issue I had with it as well, like perception wise, is it comes after, it's the first original movie since Coco, which it's obviously kind of like 3 year or 2.5 years at this point, but it's also like it's after Incredibles 2 and Toy Story 4, which neither of those are like top tier Pixar, but I do think they're really good examples of Pixar doing sequels. And so Onward is really paling in comparison to this, where like you hear Pixar's going to do an original movie again, and outside of Good Dinosaur, they haven't really fumbled the ball on like a classic, like Pixar original, like
so
pure Pixar original.
I saw the trailer for this and I'm like, yes, this is a Pixar original, but it doesn't feel like they're marketing it as like a Wall-E or an Up, like something that's going to change the world. And if maybe that's something like maybe Soul should have come out before this for that reason. But I just never, I felt like this is the movie that was promised, and I think it just delivers on that level. And I guess maybe it's an expectations game. Maybe, if there is a world where like this movie does get a proper theatrical release and maybe Soul gets one, maybe the perception of this movie is also a little bit different too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're done with immemorable like movies that are kind of like are content with being kind of like not much. I think everything we've got left on the list at this point, including the 7 movies we're going to be discussing for the rest of this episode, are like good to great Pixar.
There's some meat on the bones. I mean, I think Incredibles 2 is a. I think you are higher on it than I am. I think
Yes.
Incredibles 2. Here's the thing about Incredibles 2. There are moments in Incredibles 2 that are incredible, pun intended. Like the Jack raccoon fight. I like the ending sequence. I think is really excellent. And then there's parts of this movie that I'm just like, this is Brad Bird on his bullshit again, and the movie gets really annoying at times. So trying to negotiate those two aspects it's challenging.
Yeah, this is my like lowest tier kind of like great Pixar movie, and it's one that like every time I come away from it, I'm like, it renews my enjoyment of it, and then I kind of get like a year or two out from seeing it. I'm like, oh, am I going to bump this down? Just like my memory of it isn't that great. Like it's definitely like the weakest Brad Bird movie that isn't Tomorrowland. But then I watch it again and I'm like, no, like this is just a guy who kind of gets it intrinsically, and even him kind of like make it like this is the weakest of his 3 Pixar directorial efforts. It's far too long after the first Incredibles came out, but it's also, this is the franchise. Like I think everyone was surprised that Toy Story was able to become a sequel machine that it was, and each time they announce a new Toy Story, you're like, oh, is this going to be the one that's going to finally like collapse under the weight of this whole thing? But Incredibles is like, how are we not on Incredibles 5 at this point? It's so sequelizable, and the fact that we've only got one, and I think most people are expecting it.
Why is Brad Bird the only person that can direct these movies? That is the question that I have. Like,
Yeah.
Why is he the only one that gets to do this franchise? And I think that's the problem. I think I think if you give this, like, it's stupid to me that there's only been 2 Incredibles movies, especially with the Marvel output and whatnot. Like, this is the best. These are the 2 best Fantastic Four movies that have ever been made, and we should, again, there's so much interesting territory to explore, and it just feels like this movie does some of it, but it doesn't do enough. And it feels like, they felt like they had to start right after the end of the first one, which I think is a mixed bag. I think there are times that can work, but I think sometimes it can actually restrict what you're able to do. I think it's both. I think it's both interesting that they were able to follow up, but not as good as it could have been. The Underminer fight, I think, is good, but then it feels like, okay, we are in the same place that we were in the first movie, and that feels really frustrating.
No, absolutely. Yeah, like that is the thing where it's like we waited too long, and if this movie comes out, I'm not saying like a year afterwards, because obviously the actual production of these movies must take so long, but like if you get an Incredibles 2, like maybe in the kind of like in between Toy Story 3 and Cars 2, or in between Toy Story 3 and Brave, I do think like, yeah, like we are in a far better world, and we are getting more Incredibles movies. But yeah, for whatever reason, Brad Bird felt like he didn't have the sequel ideas. He runs off to go direct live action movies, and then comes back to doing more and more animation. Even though I do think like he is the Pixar director who has done the best in live action. I mean, I think his Mission Impossible movie is like terrific and should have led to bigger and better things. But obviously, I think his like
You tried to do Tomorrowland, you really messed up.
there are bits of Tomorrowland that I quite like. I think, I mean, obviously I'm the Lindelof apologist, and I think there's Lindelof ideas in that movie that I will stand by. I think Raffi Cassidy is like incredible in that movie, but it's just so dull in so many other ways.
It's an incredibly dull movie. That is, from what I remember, and it's not a lot, it's a really dull movie.
It's a really dull movie. It's kind of emblematic of that era of like Disney live action filmmaking. But then you also had like his LA Fires movie, or the earthquake movie he was going to make, and that was going to be like produced by Pixar, and that never really came with anything. But yeah, like, but that's Incredibles 2, a movie which I'm far higher on than you are. And then to me, number 16 is kind of like the little movie that everybody forgot. We made a joke about like Bugs Life 2. Sorry, yes. The little ant that everybody forgot. I mean, so, okay. I'm gonna open this with a question of, which is better, A Bug's Life or Ants?
A Bug's Life is truly better than Ants. But fun fact, I saw Ants in theaters. I did not see A Bug's Life.
Because you were like, I need to support Woody Allen in all the endeavors of his career. I need to make sure.
It is so ironic you say that, because I fucking hate Woody Allen even before all this stuff. Like, I never liked his movies. The only movie I ever liked of his is Blue Jasmine, and I think you know why.
Because Cate Blanchett's good in that movie.
Yes, that's literally the reason why.
I dislike Blue Jasmine. I've never seen a Woody Allen movie I actually like.
Wow, this is the podcast where you're going to find two people who hate Woody Allen. That's kind of impressive. Let's talk about A Bug's Life, though, because I think this is a really charming movie. That's every time I watch this movie, I'm like, that was good, and that's a lot of my thoughts on it. I think it's definitely playing in the Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, of course, but it kind of puts enough of a twist on it that I think it really works. And I mean, look, we can't really talk about Kevin Spacey in a positive light at this point, but I mean, he's really good as the villain in this movie.
I didn't want to speak over you. Yeah, I mean, like, we can't, like, this is the era where kind of Pixar can command, like they're coming off of Toy Story 1, and I feel like Toy Story 1, obviously, like, you get the kind of the King of Hollywood, and then you get to get King of Hollywood with Tom Hanks, and on the flip side, you get Tim Allen, who obviously is a do we call him a movie star in the 90s?
I mean, Tim Allen was definitely a big star. I think he's known more for TV with Home Improvement. But I mean, Home Improvement was literally drawing in 25 million viewers a week. So in terms of being a TV star, like, that is a big deal. And he was able to transfer that into a successful movie franchise. He was in The Santa Claus, which is one of the more popular Christmas movies year after year.
Yeah,
and a ton of money.
And I think that very much kind of like sets the tempo for kind of like the kind of actors they can get, which is like, we can get one big movie star, which Kevin Spacey in 1997 is very much that, or
Yep.
1998 even. Like, has he won an Academy Award or two at this point? Like, he's definitely done Seven, and he's definitely done
I mean,
Usual Suspects.
here's what I'm going to speculate. This movie comes out in '98. I'm going to speculate that he gets cast in this movie after he wins the Academy Awards for The Usual Suspects, and he's coming off of Seven. That's why you cast him in this villain role in 1996 or 7.
Yeah, and then every other person in this movie is basically the lead actor or like in the main ensemble for a like 90s comedy series.
And I think that's part of why the movie works, is because you have a lot of people with good comedic chops.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like that's a huge reason for it. And it does, again, it's that thing where it's like Bug's Life is not bad. It's obviously a step down from Toy Story, but it's following up fucking Toy Story. Like, nothing's gonna like look good in comparison to that. And
I mean, the fact that this movie is as good as it is speaks to how good the Pixar crew is at being able to develop a story.
absolutely. And I that's I got no bad things to say about A Bug's Life. It's one of those ones it doesn't have that source that elevates it in the way that like all the movies we're going to be like not even all the movies we're going to be discussing, but some of the movies we're discussing in this episode and basically everything we're discussing next time. But if someone were to say to me, do you just want to throw on A Bug's Life right now, I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, I'm going to have a good time watching A Bug's Life.
That's about the punch that some of the other movies are clearly going for.
It's also a hell of a lot easier to watch than Seven Samurai. That movie's 4 hours long, and this is like 90 minutes.
It's also easier to watch than The Magnificent Seven, which is over 2 hours as well.
Well, there we go. We've now decided that if you're doing like a film studies class or something like that, and your teacher sets you to study Seven Samurai, you can just throw it on Bug's Life instead, and it'll basically be the same thing.
Don't watch the 2016 version with Chris Pratt. Ugh.
No, I saw that in a cinema in Texas.
I mean, at least you saw it in the right place.
I mean, yeah,
it's in 7. See it in Texas.
Yes, it was. I mean, it wasn't good, but I felt like I was in the right atmosphere.
That's totally fair. Let's go to Italy. Let's talk about, and somebody will hate me for saying this, but let's look at the young version of another Luca, right? Luca.
Yeah, Luca is our number 15. Are you trying to make a Call Me by Your Name joke? Luca Guadagnino, director of Call Me by Your Name.
Yes, Call Me by Your Name for 8-year-olds.
I mean, this is much like Inside Out 2, a movie which would be far better if it was explicitly gay. The thing I like about this is the animation style doesn't look like normal Pixar, and this is kind of like the first one of those movies which it comes in the wake of Spider-Verse winning the Oscar, and I feel like it kind of got the green light from all of these animation studios to try a little bit, just a little bit of kind of like stylization in their animation.
Like style of this movie. I think it's gorgeous, but it doesn't feel like it's trying to be too much, if that makes sense.
No, exactly. Like it's not doing, because I don't know if you've seen any of those movies that are trying to do like the mock stop motion effect in like computer animation. I feel like video games are trying to do it a lot more.
So I mean, the Ninja Turtles did it, but I think they actually did it pretty well. And that's because you had the Meet the Robinsons director. And the Meet the Robinsons director was kind of doing that at the same time, if not a little before Spider-Verse. So I feel like I feel like he's not ripping anyone off when he does it.
No, I also feel like we have to say Meet the Mitchells, not the Robinsons. Meet the Robinsons. Meet the Robinsons is the bad Disney movie. Meet the Mitchells is the good.
I sincerely apologize to Meet the Mitchells, which is a much better movie than Meet the Robinsons. But I mean, look, all joking aside, I appreciate the fact that we have this very sweet movie about boy friendship. I genuinely think this is the type of movie that all boys should see because of how sweet it is, because of how genuine it is, and just because I think it has a really good message.
Also, you know what one of the sports in the triathlon is?
What?
You know what one of the sports in the triathlon is?
What are they?
It's swimming, biking, and then obviously instead of running, it's pasta eating, which I think is a fantastic choice, and I would definitely take part in that triathlon, not a standard run, swim, bike triathlon.
What a great idea. Just, I mean, it's such a great idea. I mean, like, it's almost a stereotype because it's Italy, but like, it is genuinely a really good idea to do that just because I think you add so much comedy to the movie by doing that. And I think because of it, you also get the wonderful, wonderful interactions between the father and the surrogate father and the kids.
Yeah, this is a really charming movie. It's easily the best movie that they kind of the best one that kind of got dumped on streaming. I know Turning Red as well did, but I feel like Turning Red got a little bit of a theatrical release, whereas this one to me was like
This one got completely shafted because I feel like Soul, because it was like it came out on Christmas, it got a push. This just didn't, and it sucks because I think this is, even though it's the lowest on our list, I think this is definitely as good as Soul, and I think it's better than Turning Red.
yeah. Number 14, the only Toy Story movie to not be in our top 10.
Awkward conversation to have because we're obviously going to be talking about Toy Story next time. So can I just
Toy Story will be the Cars of episode 2 of this ranking.
Yes. Here's the thing about Toy Story 4. I'm the angle that I'm going to take on this is Woody is the Mickey Mouse of Pixar. Can we agree on that?
You don't think it's the Tin Man from like that original short that they did?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean,
You don't think it's the ball? You don't think it's the lamp?
It's
Luxo Jr.?
Luxo Jr. I can't believe. I mean, I genuinely don't know if you're being sarcastic or not.
I mean, Woody is. I mean, it's a hard one because I feel like Woody isn't as versatile as a Mickey Mouse or a Bugs Bunny, but I absolutely understand. Like, in terms of fame of those characters, it certainly is the most well-known Pixar character.
I think he and Buzz are the ones that you associate with Pixar, and I would agree with you that, I mean, Woody cannot dress and drag like Bugs Bunny, and he can't run a steamboat like Mickey. But I think in terms of popularity, I think it's very fitting that in this movie that I think is both a logical follow-up to the trilogy, but I think also kind of feels different on purpose. The thing that I appreciate about Toy Story 4, and I think you and I are actually higher on this movie than most people, but I think what I like about Toy Story 4 is how it feels distinct from the first three movies, and it's not trying to be Toy Story 3. I like the fact that they kind of set Woody on his own journey. Obviously, the John Lasseter element of it is kind of gross when you consider like what his potential idea was. And I think the fact that you had the return of Bo Peep and you were able to tell this story, and again, I think the animation looks great. Also, the movie that will probably have Jordan Peele's last acting performance? Question mark.
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like he might do something in his movies a little bit, but like, has he done any acting?
Hosted the Twilight Zone, but he was acting in those movies.
I'm now intrigued.
Yeah, this
he's in the Bob's. Oh no, he's Wendell and Wild. He's Wild in Wendell and Wild.
Oh, and he's also Duke Ellington in that TV
Big
show.
Mouth.
Big Mouth, yeah.
Still doing that final season coming soon.
But yeah,
he's definitely settled into voice acting roles, and this is certainly probably, apart from Wendell and Wild, which was fully built around Keegan Peele, like this is one of the last times that Keegan Peele will probably work together as a duo, or like come as a package deal for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's just I think this movie is really charming. It should not be as good as it is. The fact that each Toy Story kind of comes with this, I don't know. And the fact that this movie, which admittedly is not as good as the first three, I mean, this movie is still above every other sequel that Pixar has ever made, right? We do not have, except with the exception of Toy Story, this is the highest ranked sequel, yes?
This is the highest ranked sequel outside of the other Toy Story movies. Yeah, like this is the Toy Story really is the wondrous franchise that kind of like has not yet put a foot wrong. And I mean, obviously, there's so many terrifying things about this movie when you think about it, where it's like originally Lasseter was gonna direct it, and then he stepped away, and then they have I think like 9 writers on this thing, including like Rashida Jones.
Yeah, Rashida Jones took a crack at it. I know she left, and that is one of the reasons that Lasseter left. I mean, there's a lot. Oh, there's a lot going on here.
There's so much going on here, but I do think there is like a magical thing where like they realize that the juice that they had in the way that you kind of like were teeing up in terms of like Woody being the most recognizable Pixar character was we said goodbye to Andy, we haven't said goodbye to Woody. And so building the movie to be a farewell to Woody and the gang feels right. It feels like the correct way to end this franchise. Like you get to do this moment of like Woody not being the favorite, but in a different way to when Buzz was like the favorite, where like Woody was never the favorite. Woody's got no nostalgia with Bonnie whatsoever. So
Implications to Bonnie is just being the lead toy because he's always been kind of the leader of the group. And what if he didn't have to be now?
yeah, exactly, and getting to pay off the Bo Peep stuff that was kind of like on the floor of Toy Story 3. Like there's lots of like little bits they got to do, and obviously part of that is Tim Allen and Buzz get completely shafted in this movie, which I think then becomes the terrifying fact that it sounds like Toy Story 5 is the farewell to Buzz, which I don't think is going to have the juice that the farewell to Woody has.
I mean, it all depends. It depends on so many different things. Like you're not going to do Toy Story 5 without Woody. You're just not. Like Woody's going to be in the movie. They're going to find a way to bring him in, and I don't know if that's going to work or not. But you can't have a Toy Story movie without Woody.
I'm just wondering, like, are you going to do Toy Story 5 is set before Toy Story 4, and it's like another adventure they had before that, kind of like play with the timeline kind of thing? But yeah,
I think Andy is going to play a role in Toy Story 5. I wonder if Andy is not a director of sci-fi movies and is either like going to try to reboot Buzz or something like that. I mean, which that could work. It could also really not work. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think Forky also could have been a disaster, and it's not.
Forky rules. Forky is so good. Forky as just an existential piece of this movie.
How much of the credit goes to Tony Hale? Does he get? I mean, I know the animation is what it is, but it feels like Tony Hale's the one that really makes it work.
Oh, it absolutely, like it's a slam dunk concept. It's an incredible piece. Like it's something that people have been kind of going like, oh, what counts as a toy? And so to have this existential thing where it's like, by imbuing this thing with the concept of being a toy, you can make anything into a like sentient being is terrifying. Yeah, Forky's incredible. The Forky TV show or the Forky shorts that they did are also incredible because they are definitely not what you thought they're going to be. Yeah, I have so much time for Forky. I think Forky is the thing that kind of like brings this into the realm of being as good as or as close to the other Toy Story movies as it needs to be.
It better be good because they're sacrificing a lot of other characters. And I think part of the other thing that's so remarkable is like really, Don Rickles is no longer with us. Jim Varney's no longer with us. I mean, a lot of that cast is either dying or getting old at this point. And I don't know how much you want to do Toy Story if you don't have that original cast too.
Yeah, exactly. And like the fact that they're keeping characters around through like impersonators or like using old lines that were rehearsed at this point, and it's just there's far too many members of that Toy Story cast who are, as you say, dead at this point. That yeah, it's getting like bleak and kind of like so
Tom Hanks 70, Tim Allen is in his 60s, 70s. I mean, it's again, you really are going to have to stop at Toy Story 5. Like you really do have to come to
look,
an end.
We say this, and in 2034 we're going to see Toy Story 6, and Tom Hanks will be in his 80s, and we'll be having these exact same conversations again. We'll be like, well, Toy Story 5 was a success, but like, can they really do a Toy Story 6? And at that point, you just kind of need to put your hands up and go, look, they kind of do know what they're doing with this one. I'm intrigued what Andrew Stanton does with that. Because obviously, like what was his last directed animated movie was Finding Dory. He's been off in the world of directing episodes of Stranger Things.
I think the fact that Andrew Stanton is the director really tells me that like they're taking it seriously,
Yes.
because like he is one of the Pixar originals. Like you're going to entrust this to somebody who's been there, even though obviously he worked on Toy Story. He's worked on Toy Stories, but he hasn't directed them, has he?
No, he was obviously in that original group of Toy Story 1 where like the writers on that first movie, like it's him, it's Lasseter, like the story is Lasseter, Dr. Stanton, Ranft, and then Stanton's the only guy with the screenplay credit
Right.
on Toy Story 1, and then Toy Story 2 obviously he's got the screenplay. I think he's the only guy who's written every single Toy Story movie. Yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah,
he's
I
got
mean
the
it makes
story.
sense that this is kind of his, like this is his gold watch. Like this is kind of his probably probably his last Pixar movie, perhaps.
I don't know. He hasn't made a movie since Finding Dory. And obviously he made John Carter, and then he's just been bumming around the TV world since Finding Dory. Like Stranger
I mean,
Things, Better Call Saul, Legion, For All
I mean,
Mankind, Three Body Problem. Like,
here's what I would say. I mean, yes, he's bouncing around TV, but he's bouncing around heavy genre shows that have movie-like productions. So I don't think it's not like he's directing a CBS procedural either. He is directing movies that, and I'm not talking about quality. I'm talking about like they are gearing themselves being towards movies as opposed to TV shows.
no, absolutely. Yeah, that is the thing that he is doing, which I guess is like the juice of, even if John Carter isn't a success, you're bringing in a guy who's made a movie on
So
that scale.
I mean, there are people that movie was a bomb, but there are people who like that movie too.
I like that movie. It's fine. Like, I don't have bad things to say about it. I enjoy it.
All right, let's talk about this. The next movie is probably one of our biggest disagreements. I
Yeah.
still like Turning Red, but I don't like it as much as so many other people do.
You are wrong about this one. This movie is
This
charming.
movie probably would have been in the top 10 if not for me.
Yeah, I have this movie at number 9. I think this is the like Domichi to me is like the next generational talent at Pixar, and the fact that she's been chosen to like pick up Elio to kind of like get that to the finish line, I think speaks volumes, and I can't wait to see her next wholly original idea. Obviously Bao and Turning Red are so personal stories for her. Like, she's from Toronto, she was into boy bands at this point in time, or this era in her life. But yeah, like this is the kind of thing, like obviously it's different to standard Pixar movies, but I do think it's got the elements of, let's turn real world things that we know into a metaphor of some kind. And obviously like the red panda being a metaphor for your period is possible. Like, it's wild that the Pixar was able to make that and get it past. Obviously, like, there's no explicit references to menstruation in Turning Red, but it very much is one to one in terms of like what the metaphor is doing. And I assume, I'm going to preempt this, you're going to come at this with the I wish this movie had a villain.
No, actually, I don't know that it necessarily needed a villain, but it just, so there's two things. Number one, I think the animation style is not something that I'm a huge fan of, and I think that hinders my enjoyment of it. I actually like the design of Red, the panda. I really like, but the rest of it, I don't know. It just it it just I don't really like. I've never been a huge fan of the way the Pixar's animated humans, and I think this is a really good example of that. But there's just something about there's something missing. I don't know whether it is a villain or not, because again, when you're talking about immigrant stories, like having a villain, it's like you're setting up a family member to be a villain. And in this movie especially, I think it's different. I think this movie is different from Elemental. I think you're actually in a world where a villain should exist because of the bureaucracy. In this movie, I don't necessarily know if it would be appropriate. Like, you could have a high school bully be it, but I don't know whether that is really appropriate for this movie. I don't know. It just feels like there's something missing, and I can't tell you what's missing, but it just feels like something is missing for me to truly see this as something special. And maybe it's because I'm a boy and not a girl, that because I know that people love this movie. I know that in terms of liking it, like I'm on the lower end of it. But I don't know, like, and I rewatched this and I was looking for why this movie is so, why people love it so much, and I'm just unable to find it.
What I heard then is that you hate anime as a genre and think Japan should be relegated to hell for having created such an atrocity that
I
Pixar tried
did
to.
not any. I mean, thing is that, like, I'm not a huge anime fan, so let's. You're not totally wrong, but you are exaggerating.
I am exaggerating, yeah, but I do think that is that is the style that Turning Red is going for. It's very much going for the, again, it's the immigrant story. It's the thing of the amount of Black and Asian Americans who in the 90s grew up with Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and becoming really really attached to that is well documented. And I obviously white kids were also very into that, but it very much is. Like you look now at the pop culture landscape and the amount of people who are referencing Dragon Ball Z and are who are of color, and to see Western animation more and more take on the influences of anime over the years, there are just more and more things. Obviously, you've got Avatar: The Last Airbender is very much anime indebted. Ryan the Last Dragon is very much anime indebted. Even Luca is calling out Hayao Miyazaki's work as the influence on it, but obviously seeing it through the mirror of kind of the Italian masters of like Fellini and stuff. And then Turning Red is just, to me, the thing that really elevates Turning Red is I love the blending of Western and Eastern animation in the movie, but I also just love how personal it is. It's the first Pixar movie that truly feels like it was made by a person with a perspective and like a story that they wanted to tell. And I think that's a
I would agree with
fantastic.
that. That is definitely true. I would absolutely say that this is the first Pixar movie that really does feel like it was written by one person and wasn't created in an idea factory.
Yeah, and that's not to say that the Idea Factory movies aren't fantastic, but
Oh, I
if
mean,
we're
it's literally going to be the entire top 10. So,
yes, but if the Idea Factory is running dry, then you're probably better off making something like this. And as I said, like the directors they've got in, like there are directors they've got in the well at the moment who I think are way more exciting and way more capable of doing this. Like um the director of Luca is someone who I can't wait to see what his next original idea is. And the idea that like the next like 7 or 8 movies are like all sequels is just getting really depressing from Pixar, especially when like this is the kind of movie that we could be having kind of every other year. Yes, I wouldn't mind more sequels from Pixar if we got something on the quality of a Turning Red or a Luca every other year from them.
me, I think if this movie had gotten a proper theatrical release and if it makes $1 billion, then we're probably getting a lot more of these original movies. I mean, we're also probably getting Turning Red too, but you're probably in a better position. Let's talk about the final COVID compromise movie. Do you remember Christmas 2020 was supposed to be a really big deal? Wonder Woman 2 and Soul. What a great day for movies it was going to be. And then you ended up with two movies where somebody's body was taken over without consent. How did we end up in this place, Ben?
I mean, I do remember. I think I'm now checking my Letterboxd diary, but I do think that I watched Soul. Yeah, no, I did. It's 25th of December, 2020. The entirety of like London was in lockdown because of a COVID resurgence. No one was allowed to like leave the city, and a bunch of my friends were like trapped in London because we waited a bit too long to like leave to go see family. And so we organized like a group call where we would like all load up Disney Plus and all watch Soul on Christmas Day all together as like a makeup for not having family around. So there's like 7 or 8 of us on a call and we're all just watching Soul. And I do think that's always and forever gonna like bump my score of Soul up because I do think it is the weakest of the kind of the Pete Docter like let's literalize bureaucracy um movies. Because obviously like Inside Out, Soul, and Monsters Inc. are like the exact same concept. Up is interesting in that it's a complete outlier from the other stuff that he's done, but Soul is the weakest of those. But even then, there's like stuff that I really like. Like I think this is a far better jazz movie than La La Land is. I love the kind of depiction of the creatures in the afterlife. And then, as you say, we get into what if we turn this black man into a cat, and we'll have
But
Tina
the black
Fey.
man is taken over by the fact that it's Tina Fey, who has a reputation for say being culturally insensitive. I think that is the casting decision that will bother me the most, probably of any movie on this list. If you casted a black woman, that's probably the ideal. If you cast most other actresses, even if they're white, probably not as bad. Okay, not Scarlett Johansson either, but you could do it and have it not be problematic, but not in this case.
No, absolutely, and and like again, this is one that's got like some fantastic stuff. Like I love Rachel House as Terry is like really fun in this movie. All the voices like Richard Ayoade, Alice Braga, Wes Studi, Fortune Feimster, and Zenobi Shroff as like the
great voice. The music in this movie, of course, is great. Even when the kids are playing poorly, like that's so well done. There are some amazing moments in this movie that really have stuck with me, and just the idea of what jazz is and how it connects to the themes. I mean, the theme and the music are so well connected, and I think the idea of soul. This is just such a great idea for a movie. I think it misses the mark a little bit, but not by much. And I feel like I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it didn't get a theatrical release. Maybe that hurt it. It just feels like this movie feels like you are one or two decisions away from something that is in the Pixar canon as one of their best.
yeah, no, that's exactly that. Like it, I think because it is the third iteration on this kind of story, and it doesn't have the emotional landing of an Inside Out, and there's like too much human shenanigans, and you almost wish there was more time in like the soul world, and that the more of the kind of the juice was coming from that. It's a movie that's like lesser than the sum of its parts in some way.
That's actually a really good way of putting it. Like it's got this great concept, but then the pieces take away from the concept as opposed to positively contributing to it.
Yeah. I'm but obviously thankful for this to be like obviously Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross, and John Baptiste did the score for this movie. It won them their second Oscar, but I feel like this was the moment where I kind of felt like, ooh, a Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score could be anything at this point, and kind of paves the way for like what they're gonna do in stuff like Bones and All and The Killer and
I can't
Challengers.
tell you how excited when Ross when their names come up on a score. I cannot even begin to tell you how excited I get, no matter what it is.
So you watch The Gorge purely for their score.
I mean, look, The Gorge is a mediocre movie, but the score still slaps. Like it's amazing. Like no matter what they do, like and admittedly, it's not their best score, but I mean, look, they've done. I mean, the Challenger score alone, and the fact that it didn't win an Academy Award. I mean, it's just fucking insulting that wasn't even nominated.
Wasn't even nominated. Well, like, even something like Waves, a movie which I really dislike, the score's really good.
That might be the movie that you and I disagree. Probably one of the biggest gaps.
I just had a deeply unpleasant time in the cinema with that.
Yes.
Right.
Can we talk? Speaking of not winning Oscars, how has John Goodman never been nominated for an Oscar? My God.
Yeah, I mean, but John Goodman's like, I feel like John Goodman's got that element of he was too much of a TV guy, and all of the roles that you probably would nominate him for an Oscar for are at the same time where he's too much of a TV guy, and then like you get to something like 10 Cloverfield Lane, and probably should have at least been nominated for that movie, but obviously it's too science fiction, and it's an academy that isn't kind of like geared up to reward something like that. But John Goodman is incredible.
I mean, tell me something that he isn't the best part of. Roseanne, best part of that. Obviously, you get into most of his movie roles. I mean, he is the best part of any.
Do I think he's the best part of Speed Racer? Probably not.
I mean, that might be the exception.
Is he the best? I mean, he's second in Argo.
Right, I would say
because Alan Arkin gets to say "Argo, fuck yourself" more times.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's almost not fair. I mean, in most things, John Goodman is the best, and I mean, I like Billy Crystal a lot, but I mean, John Goodman's just on another level. Even in this movie, when I mean, Billy Crystal is kind of the main character, but I mean, they're great as a duo. It's shocking to me that they have never been in a movie together in live action, but I mean, they're really good in this kind of buddy movie that kind of puts a twist on things with Boo. I would die for Boo. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously didn't talk much about Monster University, but it is probably one of the smartest things about that movie is them going like, we can't do a sequel to Monsters Inc. because we have to solve the Boo problem, or like we have to come up with a satisfying next step of the relationship with Boo, and the final moment of this movie is too perfect to fuck with. So I'm just very, very thankful that they've never, ever, ever dared kind of like come up.
They did a sequel series on Disney Plus, but Boo is not there.
I didn't even realize there was the sequel series. Is that like, it's not just shorts, is it? Or
it is a TV series. Billy Crystal and John Goodman are they are supporting characters. They are not the main character.
Monsters at Work, that's the one.
Yep.
2 seasons. TV nowadays is truly like another world away. Like I was looking at like
a series on Netflix that has Giancarlo Esposito, Jason Lee, Ken Marino, one of the women whose name I cannot pronounce from Orange Is the New Black is the lead. I mean, this just came out this week. It's absolutely insane.
I mean, I was looking at a list of like prospective Emmy nominations that were coming up and everything, and I was looking at like the lead actor nominations. I was like, there is not a person there from a TV show that has like more than 2 seasons, which is like nuts to think about in just kind of like where we're at in the TV world.
If Noah Wyle wasn't on that list, then it's wrong.
It was Pedro Pascal, Noah Wyle, Sterling K. Brown, and someone. But again, everything there is like a first or second season show.
It's pretty crazy. Anyway, Monsters Inc. It's not top tier Pixar, but it's damn good Pixar, I would say.
It's this to me. I feel like this is the one that people my age are like very, very affectionate for. Like there are people I know who would probably have this like in their top 5, but I do think it.
This is my number 9. This does crack my top 10.
Yeah, and it's very close for me. It's like 13, but like it's. I mean, to be honest, I probably should have had it higher than something like Soul. In all honesty, on reflection, now I'm like staring at the list, but I think that's probably the only spot I would have raised it up. I think this movie is like so charming. I think Steve Buscemi is great. Here's a question for you, which kind of like came up. Who is the lead villain of Monsters Inc.?
I mean, there's 2 or 3 of them. I mean,
is it Randall or is it Waternoose?
I mean, Waternoose, I would say, is the lead.
But I guess the question, the one that I'm always thinking about, like, did Randall make the machine to extract screams and present it to Waternoose as a solution to their problem, and Waternoose put his backing behind it?
This is why we needed a movie between Monsters University and Monsters Inc. to answer that question.
And James Coburn would obviously still be voicing Waternoose, right?
No, he is very dead. Like he died shortly after this came out.
I mean, he's really good. Waternoose is really good. James
Coburn has a great voice, so it's only natural that you would cast him.
And I have to say that my wife would be very remiss if I did not mention this. She's been saying for kind of 25 years almost, like how good the final like chase sequence with all the doors and running between the different things would make a fantastic theme park ride. And Disney have recently announced that they are indeed finally making the Monsters Inc. door ride.
How do you not? I don't understand that at all.
And I think I'm going to bring this episode to a close with the one thing where it's like that door sequence is obviously a moment where like Lasseter and everyone involved, but obviously like Dr. Stanton, everyone involved in it has kind of pointed to Wallace and Gromit, Wrong Trousers, the train sequence as like a big influence on them trying to top what Wrong Trousers does in that train sequence with that door sequence. And they come close, but they do not manage to top like the greatest chase sequence in animation history.
I mean, that's pretty hard to do. The fact that you're even trying says a lot. Yeah, Monsters Inc. is to me, this movie's just a complete blast. Gets in and gets out. I mean, just perfect at 92 minutes. And like, I just love a good animated movie that's 90 minutes. I mean, I know that Pixar has also fallen into the trap of doing longer and longer movies, but I mean, give me something like this. I mean, just you could not do worse. Afternoon, if you need 90 minutes to kill, it's really great.
I don't get what you mean. I think this trend of animated movies actually going longer than 2 hours now is a fantastic thing that we should be supporting more of. Spider-Man
No,
Across the Spider-Verse, 2 hours, 20 minutes.
I really like that movie, but I have so many thoughts, but we're not.
Remember
we're not
when they said they were going to get a sequel to that movie out within a year of release?
Again, you don't want to get me started. Anyway, we are going to be back for part 2 in the month of July. We are going to be talking about the top 10. You can surmise what the top 10 is based on our conversation, but there are going to be some twists along the way.
You're right. Cars 2 will indeed be number 1 and number 28 at the same time.
It somehow has crossed the threshold of the multiverse to become the best Pixar movie.
Fuck you, Ratatouille. You are not on the list anymore. Cars 2 is on twice.
Why that movie? Why of all the ones?
I didn't want to spoil like a super high placing movie, but like I just didn't want to like, if I went for something that was like top 3, I would have like felt like I was kind of like showing my hand a bit too much.
Anyway, all right. So we are going to be back in a couple months to discuss that. Should we also discuss Moana 2 at some point as well, because that would now be on our 63. I know that movie is very high on your list of best Disney movies of all time.
I mean, I'm loading the list now. You've forced my hand to say where it ended up. I think I've not. Moana 2 is a rock solid 56th out of 63. Behind Wish, ahead of Pocahontas, which I think is like a sweet spot for that movie. Fingers crossed, Moana season 3 will be better than Moana season 2.
Season 3 on purpose, didn't you?
Yeah.
Moana 2 is number 47, so slightly higher than you.
That's a lot higher.
I mean, but really, like, it's number 47, but it's basically ahead of like Dinosaur, and all of the like collaborating movies and Oliver and Company and stuff like that. So it is definitely higher, but it's not great. Anyway, Ben, do you have anything else to plug?
I have nothing eternally to plug. I've got no coals in the no coals in the fire. Nothing really upcoming. I'm barely on social media at this point, apart from Letterboxd, where I am just kind of at the moment pootling through blank checks March Madness. I'm kind of watching one movie from each director that's failing each individual day. So I've had a great time where I've been watching like Paul Thomas Anderson movies and Terrence Malick and Baz Luhrmann and Todd Haynes. I'm having a really good time with my actual movie watching, because I'm going for like the top end greatest movies of all time, not like the dregs of a movie from a decade or anything like that. And then the other thing I'm doing is I'm finally polishing off a Spielberg ranking, which I think you fell off yours a couple of years ago. I don't think you like quite.
So it's funny you say that, because one of the ideas that I have for next year potentially is doing a 3 or 4 part series on ranking Spielberg.
Well, I will have my confirmed list at that point. I've only got the ones I've never seen before are Always and Amistad, which are the only two blind spots I've got left. I've seen Hook, I've seen Lost World, I've seen Saving Private Ryan.
What is wrong with a white director directing a movie about slavery? I see no problems.
No problems whatsoever. But yeah, I wouldn't get those 5 I just said are the ones I'm going to rewatch ahead of like publishing my list. I might throw on. Well, I don't know. Like, I mean, the only thing I would say is like next year we've got The Dish, which is like the 35th movie and his first like big budget summer blockbuster movie in God knows how. Well, no, I guess since Ready Player One, since the last time he did that. So
don't even get me started on that. But yeah, it will definitely be taken into consideration, because yeah, this might be Spielberg's like last big blockbuster, So we'll definitely have to take that into account. Will we talk about Columbo? Maybe. We'll see.
I'm very tempted to do a deep dive into Columbo.
Benjamin.
It's not a UK thing. Like, I've never seen a single episode of Columbo. I don't even know if it's streaming anywhere in the UK. It's such an American institution. We've got our own cozy murder shows in the UK.
We Columbo. I mean, my generation has discovered Columbo, and I think it's because it is on a lot of free streaming services here. Columbo is wonderful. Peter Falk is Peter Falk is a genuine institution, and never forget it. You, as a Mikey and Nicky fan, you should absolutely give Columbo a watch.
I absolutely should. I've just looked. It's on a streaming service, but it leaves in 10 days, so I need to log off right now to go start watching every 90-minute episode of Columbo.
The pilot is directed by Spielberg. That's why this came up. So,
no, it's not.
Oh, that's right.
Two pilots. The first episode that aired as a regular episode of the season was directed by Steven Spielberg. There are two pilots beforehand that were not. The episode by Spielberg is the first episode where he wears the coat and looks a bit disheveled. So it's like the first proper Columbo episode.
It's the first canon level Columbo. God damn it. All right. I've had enough. Ben, have a good one. We will talk to you again in a couple months. Believe it or not, we will get back to focusing on Pixar.